arena.
You spoke about the intra-trade.
Yes.
Let's look at the oil currently.
Yes.
It is a crisis. You look at South Africa now, people complaining about the petrol increase. But we have Nigeria, Angola, producing oil. Why are we still importing oil from Saudi Arabia? What's the problem?
You know, it is tragic. Nigeria, for example, does not have a proper functioning refinery. One would have expected that there are refineries in that part of the world. In the western part of Africa, we have Ghana producing oil. We have Gabon producing oil. We have Equatorial Guinea producing oil in the Central Africa. We have Angola that you've talked about. On this other end, we have Mozambique with the natural gas. One would have expected in an organized continent that we would be talking about piping this gas, piping the oil and piping the gas. And these are the low-hanging fruits that we can deal with. Muammar al-Gaddafi demonstrated within a very short time through Oil Libya that you could, in a manner of speaking, start from the oil wells through to the oil pumps through state intervention. And going forward, these are the kind of conversations that one would want to see being undertaken at the African Union. How do we use our resources so that we don't have Nigeria exporting crude oil and importing refined oil with all the byproducts being used by other civilizations? These are urgent issues. These are the issues that Africa ought to be preoccupied with. How are we going to use the gas? If you know, Mozambique now has a lot of gas. Tanzania has a lot of natural gas. But who is involved in harnessing all these? If it is not the Chinese, it is the French. And they are serving their own interests, not our interests as a continent. The sooner we recognize through political leadership that we must take charge of our interests, the safer we are. Ali Mazrui of Kenya used to say, and I agree with him, that the tragedy of Africa is that Africa produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. The time has come that we must consume what we produce and trade on the balance or the excess that we want to use to acquire other products.
What I have observed during that meeting in Beijing, it looks like the relationship has been taken to a level of including peace and security. What does that mean? Because previously it was about trade.
You know, China, in its own very subtle way, wants to be a world power to rival the United States of America. And you can see that right now they have, I think they have military installations in Djibouti. And progressively, I think what they are going to do is to say, you African countries don't have the capacity to patrol your territorial sea. You don't have the capacity to patrol your exclusive economic zones. We are going to give you the vessels to do this, and this is part of our contribution to peace and development. Internally, we are going to have Chinese peacekeeping forces in Niger, in Mali, and I think we should be very wary of that. I think Africa, as has been stated under the 7 pillars of Agenda 2063, should free herself of military installations by any powers, the Americans, the Chinese, the French, the British. And you have mentioned China, but a Britain that is outside of Europe will be looking towards Africa. And it is not lost on me that in the last few days, we have had the British Prime Minister visiting South Africa, visiting Nigeria, and visiting Kenya.
What's the agenda?
The agenda is that there is a new scramble for Africa. And they are worried that China is getting a foothold, and in order to ensure that that foothold does not quite exclude them, we've got to renew our interest by appealing to our association. You'll see them talking about strengthening the Commonwealth. You'll see the French President Macron visiting Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal and said our camaraderie and our brotherhood as people who belong to one Commonwealth. And you've seen Angela Merkel recently. So there is a new scramble for Africa, but it's not as blatant as it was in those early years. It is much more subtle. It is being shrouded and concealed in trade and cooperation. And if we are not very careful, trade is the Trojan horse. It will enter into the room, and once it has entered into the room, before we know it, the tent will be occupied.
It looks like America is not interested. Is it because of the new leader who is inward looking, or there's no value for the Americans?
I think the Americans are interested. Don't be cheated about the Americans, because the truth is that if you look at during the presidency of President Trump, I think the expenditure on military has grown exponentially. And in a very subtle way, they are also still very present quietly, not as noisily as they used to be. So their apparent lack of interest is not a statement that we are moving out. They are simply saying we are focusing on the domestic arena, but their strategic interest in Africa and the rest of the world is still alive and well. In other words, I'm saying, if we are not careful, there is going to be a major scramble for Africa. And what will be the modus operandi? Divide and rule. People are going to be told, the French are going to tell their colonies, you work with us. The British are going to tell their former colonies, work with us. The Portuguese are going to tell their former colonies, work with us. They are going to put emphasis on bilateral relationship rather than regional and multilateral, regional and continental. And the way to defeat this, easier said than done, is to go through regions, and if you go beyond regions, go continental, and all the bilaterals are then discussed within the region or within the continental.
Multilateralism.